What's up, y'all? We are back with another edition of DNVR Rams Live. I'm Justin Michael, as always. Got a fun show for you. Going to play an interview with team captain Henry Blackburn from earlier this week, where he kind of gives some insight into just how much it meant to him to finally, win a trophy game with people in the stands. He was on the team for that Wyoming win, which I've talked about a bunch of times in 2020. It was just such a weird night with the empty stadium and pumped in crowd noise and, special moment in the locker room still, but just kind of felt hollow. The great thing about those rivalry wins is how much they mean to the community, and you get to celebrate with them and like be part of that. And I think it's a lot of validation for the hard work that the players put in. So obviously this win over Air Force was a big deal for the program. First win in the spring since 2002. I got to see them bring the bronze boot back to Fort Collins as well, but it is good to see a trophy in the Hall of Champions. It's been far too long. We're going to talk about a lot of stuff on today's show. I'm going to give out some keys to victory for the Rams. Obviously, CSU has beaten New Mexico 12 straight times, but this is not the same old Lobos we've seen over the years. I'll get into the series history. I'll talk about some of my favorite moments personally in the series. We'll also give an update on CSU volleyball, CSU women's soccer, a little rendition of what's happening in Agland. I wanted to start with the scheduling change, which was announced yesterday afternoon for CSU football. If you missed it, the Rams will not be going to Vanderbilt next season as originally scheduled. That was a 4-game agreement that looks like it's only going to end up being 1 game in the end. The 2020 trip to Nashville obviously did not happen for COVID, which was a bummer. Now CSU will be hosting Washington State on September 27th, 2025, instead of making that trip to SEC country. I understand that a lot of fans were pretty excited about that. I have some CSU fans that support the show that I know live in the area, and they were definitely looking forward to it. I know plenty of others were eager to make that trip out there. It's a fun destination. Out of all of the towns you could go to, Nashville is probably pretty high in terms of still getting like a college experience on campus and stuff, but having a little bit more options. Some of those college towns can be kind of desolate. Nashville's not really a college town, but I just mean for a college trip, a college football trip, it would be pretty fun. So I get why there are people disappointed there. At the same time, it makes a lot of sense to help Washington State fill out their schedule. On top of that, you now get 7 home games for the second straight year, which is a huge advantage. That's a big win. You have an opportunity, to host another premier opponent, a future conference mate. Washington State and Oregon State, they're already playing a home and home next year, which is not something I've ever seen on the football side. I know it was pretty common a long time ago. I'm talking like 50 plus years ago. Logistically, I think it makes a lot of sense in a really wonky year for those two schools. Just fill out that schedule, get to 2026 when you have this new iteration of the Pac-12. But, I understand that it was kind of a bummer to lose that trip to Nashville. I'm not trying to be completely dismissive there or anything like that. I was looking forward to it. I'd been looking forward to it for a couple of years. But I just think this makes a lot of sense, given that you get the 7 home games, given that you kind of got to do what you can to help out Washington State. These schools in these turbulent waters, man, they got to stick together. And, you're trying to rebuild this Pac-12 league together. I think it makes a lot of sense to, basically lend out a helping hand and help them fill out their schedule, which is probably a very daunting nightmare for these two schools, or has been, just given that, usually in football, you're scheduled out multiple years in advance. Obviously, we're seeing more and more tweaks to the schedule, as made evident by losing this Vanderbilt series. But I can't imagine it's been an easy process trying to fill these games on the fly. Fill 10 games like they knew they were going to play Oregon State. You needed to find 11 other games, and they obviously weren't able to, given that they're doing the home and home. I just think it makes a lot of sense to help out Washington State. When the Pac-12 news was announced, what was that? Basically like a month ago now. Part of the selling point, and part of what, Parsons told me when I interviewed her, was that these schools have a like-minded vision. And I think there's a real sense of togetherness. So it makes a lot of sense. And, as Taylor says in the Toyota chat, good morning to everybody in the Toyota chat. Didn't think we'd see 7 home games again for a long time, if ever. This is a big scheduling win for the Rams. They will now open at the University of Washington on August 30th. UNC, the Bears, they're coming on September 6th. I imagine that'll be Ag Day. September 20th, UTSA comes to town. 27th against Washington State. I've already seen some people joke if CSU were to beat Washington and Washington State, could they get an honorary Apple Cup? Maybe, Colorado, the beer vibes, we'd turn it into a cider or something like that. The cider showdown. September 13th, to be announced as of now. Could be a bye game, could technically be a league game. Air Force, for instance, usually plays some league games in early September because they have the Service Academy games later on. So something to keep an eye on, but that's the schedule as of now. Just a couple of thoughts on that. I think it's an exciting opportunity to host a quality opponent, and basically 7 home games is a no-brainer for the Rams. I understand there will be some disappointment about losing the trip to Nashville, but outside of the city itself, I don't know if Vanderbilt, although they are obviously on the rise this year, is like a team that most people view as a bucket list destination. It's not going to Texas or Michigan or Alabama or LSU or something like that. It's not the end of the world. It would have been cool to see CSU and Vandy play more of some of those games that they were originally scheduled to play. But it is what it is. And I think this is a pretty solid schedule that's coming together. When the news was initially announced, I posted what included a Mountain West schedule. I've received a correction since then that those schedules are not official. So, on that, it had Air Force, Fresno, Hawaii, and UNLV at home. Trips to New Mexico, Wyoming, Nevada, and San Jose State. That would be the 3rd trip to Reno in 4 years, which would probably just be a product of some scheduling quirks caused by the Pac-12 alliance with Oregon State and Washington State this year. The Rams were supposed to go to San Diego State. That didn't end up happening. They're going to Reno instead. Obviously, not having to play the Boise matchup either, which was a big win. We'll see. I don't know if there's actually going to be changes to the schedule, or if maybe CSU was not supposed to release that yet, like the conference wanted to release it. And so there's not actually going to be some changes. I don't know. We'll see. Could be that schedule is just not it. It could be that it got released prematurely and they're trying to walk it back. We'll see what happens there. We're going to get to the Henry Blackburn interview here in just a couple of moments, but I just briefly wanted to give an update on the Pac-12 situation. They have hired Octagon to negotiate a media deal. They're a big player in the space. I've read some stuff on them. They are responsible for putting Home Depot as the sponsor of game day. That's obviously a big deal. They've done a lot of stuff, and I think it makes a lot of sense to essentially go to all the various, networks and streaming platforms and find out more information as far as, what are we going to get for an annual payout if we add just Memphis? What if it's Memphis, Tulane, and UTSA? What about Texas State? All of those different scenarios. My guess is if they were to add an East Coast footprint, it probably brings the money up. But the question is it by enough to justify the strain and resources you would have to have by traveling all across the country? I do think remaining in the West Coast, and specifically having such a strong presence in the western half of the country, is the biggest strength for the Pac-12. But the more time zones you're in, the more lucrative you're probably going to be to the TV networks. I think somebody to keep an eye on will definitely be like TNT and all those channels. I think CW is an intriguing option. I know a lot of people scoffed at it initially, but it's a channel that's very much accessible. Everybody gets it on a basic cable. To get CBS Sports Network, a lot of the time you have to have an advanced sports tier, depending on what type of service you have. I think being on channels that most people have is a strong selling point, and that was kind of a misplay in the old Pac-12, was turning their nose up at that possibility, as was probably turning down the $25 million or whatever they got offered from Apple. They definitely overplayed their hand. You're not going to get anything close to that with this iteration of the Pac-12. I do think, though, you're looking probably at double digits. At least that would be the hope to justify doing all this. And, spending the cost, I think, 10 to 12 million a year, that would be a success. If you manage to get it up more than that, 15, that would be incredible. But that's certainly not what I'm necessarily anticipating. I wouldn't hold my breath thinking that that's going to happen. I still personally believe that they find a way to get Memphis done. That's my opinion. That's not sourced. I'm sure there's still active conversations happening, and I do think they have to take a hard look at a team like Texas State, who I did find it interesting that they turned down the Mountain West. Like, what type of conversations had they had with the Pac-12? Like, maybe they were told to kind of hold off for a second and see what happens with all this. We'll see what happens there. I'd be more intrigued at Texas State as a football only member than a full fledged member, but obviously you're going to have to add at least one more full member to make all of this work under the current NCAA guidelines. I think Memphis is the best option. If you could somehow convince UConn, especially with what you're building on the basketball side, I think that would be worth it, despite the logistical issues that would be caused from having to go all the way to Connecticut. And at that point, it really probably makes more sense to, add South Florida and have a travel partner for somebody on that side of the country. But you don't necessarily need it. I mean, it depends on what we're willing to commit to them and what type of commitment they're willing to make for football, which is in a weird spot, independent at the moment in the Big East for the rest of their sports. Do they want a home for their football program enough to be willing to move the UConn basketball out of the Big East? I don't know. I'm a little skeptical of that, but I think having Gonzaga and San Diego State in the mix makes it much more likely. I wonder if they kick the tires on St. Mary's. Reportedly, they've had some conversations there. St. Mary's would make sense too, because you had a baseball program at that point. They've got quality men's and women's soccer. Could help fill some holes there that are caused by, like CSU doesn't have baseball, for instance. They're not going to add baseball anytime soon. Just something to keep an eye on. But adding Octagon, I think, makes a lot of sense. It's the next logical move. And I imagine, once they get some realistic numbers and not just projections to bring to these other schools, that's when, you start to see the ball really start to get rolling there, and the next move and realignment coming together. It's been quiet, obviously, for a couple of weeks now, but I'm sure any day we're going to wake up to some type of bombshell report regarding the future of the Pac-12, but that's where we're at right now. That's kind of what we know. Before we play that interview with Henry Blackburn, talking about what it meant to him to win a trophy game, he also talked about the challenges of playing New Mexico and a very mobile quarterback like Devin Dampier and the growth he's seen out of Gabe Kershke. If you missed it, I wrote a feature on Gabe Kershke, which featured quotes from Blackburn as well as Jay Norvell, and Gabe himself kind of talking about his ascension in the program, talking about, a big time game against Air Force, which was awesome. Shout out to everybody in the Toyota chat. Get ready for the season ahead with quality shades built to last. Our friends at Shady Rays have you covered with premium polarized shades that won't break the bank. Shady Rays is an independent sunglasses company offering a world-class product. Rated 5 stars by over 300,000 people. They've got options for everybody. If you're looking for like a sporty fit, if you're looking for more of a stylish out-on-the-town fit, they've got something for you. And they probably got it in your team colors as well. Exclusively for our listeners, Shady Rays giving out the best deal of the season. Head to shadyrays.com. Use the code DNVR for 35% off polarized sunglasses. Try for yourself the shades rated 5 stars by over 300,000 people. I also want to talk to you guys about Toyota, the official vehicle of DNVR and a proud sponsor of CSU Athletics. Trucks have always been a part of Toyota's DNA for generations. Toyota has built durable legends destined for greatness and perfect for Colorado. Whether you're conquering off-road trails or hauling the weight of the world, there's a Toyota truck that's just right for you, like the all-new 2024 Tacoma and the return of the iconic 2024 Land Cruiser. Toyota also offers more low and zero-emission vehicles combined than any other automaker to give customers numerous choices to reduce their carbon footprint. 16 hybrid vehicles to choose from, like the Tundra iForce Max hybrid truck. Toyota SUVs take command on the road and on the trail, so you can explore the road less traveled without having to sacrifice smooth city rides in SUVs like the RAV4 and Grand Highlander. Toyota is a proud partner of CSU Athletics and the official vehicle of DNVR. I'm going to get to this interview with Henry Blackburn. I thought it was awesome to see a local kid like him who's obviously been very much committed to this program and the rebuild of the last 5 years, or attempted rebuild, I guess you should say, not quite there yet. He's a guy that plays with a lot of emotion. He's one of the leaders in the locker room. No, he's not very popular in certain parts of this state. He was villainized for what was a penalty, and rightfully so. But that whole circus was ridiculous, especially considering a lot of the people that are like in my chat right now still trying to villainize him. Those same people, idolize Shiloh Sanders, who might be the dirtiest player in college football. Just some irony there, a little bit. Henry has been a much improved player these last couple years. I think he's really grown into a complete free safety. He's really rangy, covers a ton of ground. Obviously, he is a big hitter, but he is a big factor in pass coverage as well. And his ability to cover so much ground is a big part of what allows the Rams to use, some of their other DBs down near the line of scrimmage, Jack Howell and Dom Morris and some stuff like that, Aiden Hector, depending on when he's out there. But Blackburn has been such an important piece for this team, and it was awesome to see him and guys like Jack Howell and guys like Chase Wilson get this moment after, a lot of heartbreak. These are guys that very easily could have hit the portal. Blackburn didn't have to use his 5th year if he didn't want to. They've stayed committed to CSU for moments like this past weekend, and obviously you got to continue that momentum that you've established these last couple of weeks, and I'm going to get into that. We're going to talk about the keys, some areas where the Rams need to refine some things. But I do think the passion and the commitment to CSU from some of these veteran leaders, from guys like Henry Blackburn, like Jack Howell, has been huge as CSU has looked to transition through these out of this losing cycle that they've been in for just far too long. But here's that interview with Henry Blackburn, and always appreciate him giving me some time. Always been great to us here at DNVR Rams. What did this mean to you guys to win a trophy game?
I mean, that was everything. It just feels great. The guys work their butts off. This team has just been putting everything into this season and to just scratching the claw, getting victory, put our trust in the Lord. And, he gave us a gift of the trophy. It's nice to have that one in canvas for the first time ever.
You were here in 2020, right, for the border war, yeah, where it's such a weird feeling, like an empty stadium. I know that meant a lot to win that game, but it probably felt a little odd not having anybody there to celebrate it with you. What was it like to look up in the stands? And I mean, obviously this was a win that meant so much to the community.
Yeah, I mean, that was awesome. Yeah, 2020 game was strange because that was my first home game in canvas. No fans, people peeking in through the gate. It was a weird situation, but getting the Ram Falcon, it just means a lot. Being from Colorado, there's a lot of Colorado kids on our team that have been playing in this game. We know a lot of dudes at Air Force and stuff, and a lot of respect to them. But it's been some battles over the years, but we finally got on top of that. We beat the triple option, so now we can eyes forward towards New Mexico.
It's obviously different stylistically, but you guys have played some mobile quarterbacks. This is probably the most mobile quarterback that you guys will face. Just what are you emphasizing as a defense going up against Dampier?
Yeah, we have a lot of respect for him. He does a lot of good stuff on tape. He's kind of just a ball player. He makes things happen. We got to be really locked in the back end. Just the play's never over. We got to just all be aware of where he's at. What he can do, scrambling, moving the pocket. He's a good player, so we're excited for this challenge this week. It's going to be a fun one, homecoming game. It's good. I'm glad that New Mexico is looking like a better team than they have in the past. So just respect to those guys, and we're preparing the right way this week.
Kershke is a guy who's obviously really flashed this season, but I mean, he was a monster in that win over Air Force. What kind of growth have you seen out of him this year?
Oh, he's awesome. I mean, he's just a great dude. Like, outside of football, outside of everything, he's all about his business. He does things the right way. And it's no surprise that it's starting to show up on the field just because of the way he carries himself and the way he goes through life and through football. Like, he's just a professional, and he's really he's just a good dude. And
he's pretty meticulous, isn't he? With his prep?
Yeah, his prep is really detailed. He does a lot of recovery, a lot of film, a lot of things that you could just tell that, his mind's in the right place and he's working every week, and it's starting to show up on tape, and that's awesome for us. It's great for the team, and it's awesome to have him in our program. He's like a brother to us already.
You guys have been really solid on third down these last couple of games, doing a good job of getting off the field. What do you think's been the biggest key for the success you guys are having right now?
Yeah, money down. You got to win money down. So that's just something that we emphasize every week. Our coaches do a good job putting together a plan for third down. We give teams a hard time with what we do on third down. So that's just something we're going to continue to build on. That's just something like when Money Down comes around, everybody's focus is just that much better, that much more detailed. Communication is that much more, and guys are just really locked in. So, I'll credit just the focus of the team and our coaches putting together a good plan for that.
You guys, you didn't hold back on that last offensive series. Freddie sending pressure. How validating is that as a DB when they trust you guys in the back end to be like, you want to know what? No, we're not just going to drop 8. We're gonna go after them.
Yeah, that's good. That's great. And we got a lot of veterans at DB around the board, corner, safety, nickel. So we got a lot of guys who can play football. We got a lot of guys who know what they're doing. So just to have the trust with Coach Banks, I mean, that's something that's just built over time, and it's just great to be able to do that.
Big shout out to Henry Blackburn, always great with me. I always appreciate him. One of my favorite players in program history. The Rams have played really hard these last 3 weeks. They've got to seize this opportunity ahead of them. You've got a 500 record for the first time since 2000, or you're above 500, I should say, for the first time since 2017. Looking to now go 2 games above 500. To be at 5-3 is not something that the Rams have been fortunate enough to be able to do very frequently over the last decade. Obviously, it stings that you let that game against Oregon State slip away. I think for a long time, especially if you keep winning, there will be a lot of woulda, coulda, shoulda. And frankly, the Rams beat themselves in that game. So you've got to find a way to limit some of the self-inflicted wounds that have been too prevalent. I don't want to sound like a broken record. I feel like I've talked about that ad nauseum over the last couple of weeks. But obviously, you could have blown out your opponent in back-to-back weeks, and instead you kind of allowed them to hang around, to crawl back into it. This time around, if you have a chance against this New Mexico team, you cannot leave the door open. You have to leave no doubt when it comes to them. I mean, they managed to pull off an insane comeback against Utah State that they didn't lead until the final minute of regulation. They had 4 turnovers, gave up almost 50 points, still found a way to win. They are a resilient bunch. They have a lot of explosiveness on the offensive side of the football. Devin Dampier, just because of what he brings to the table as a rusher as well, I think is probably the most dangerous matchup from a quarterback standpoint that you'll face in the Mountain West right now. I think, BFN, I think Shager out at Hawaii, they're probably better throwers of the football consistently. But Dampier is, outside of Gianti, probably the best, runner in the open field in the Mountain West. He is electric. He's really strong. It's kind of a bowling ball, bounces off tacklers, but he also has the speed to, get to the sideline and then get upfield on you. He is a really tricky assignment defensively, and I think that's the biggest key in this matchup is you have to limit Dampier's impact on the ground. If you can contain him within the pocket, if you can make him have to beat you consistently with his arm, all of a sudden, this offense gets much more manageable. That's not to say that he can't make some plays that way as well. He's a very talented player, but where he becomes especially dangerous and, kind of lethal on you is when he's able to extend the play, when he's able to improvise. Despite the fact that he's running around out there, he does a really good job of not creating negative plays. He's still not been sacked this season, which is pretty wild. That's a testament to his ability to get rid of the football. But also, the New Mexico offensive line, who doesn't have the easiest job. It's not super easy to block for a quarterback like that likes to run around. You don't always know where he is. I will say he's very purposeful with the way he moves. I don't feel like he's running around like a chicken with his head cut off or something like that. A lot of times, he's kind of sliding in the pocket, slide and step here, step there, just trying to buy some time. And then boom, he might take off on you. But he is looking to move the ball downfield. I don't think it's always just fight or flight for him, just always going to take off. He's a very talented player. But while he has created 19 total touchdowns, he also has 9 interceptions. And I think part of that is a product of him having to be Superman, kind of like BFN last year. I feel like he was in a position a lot where, when you're throwing as often as they were, when you're always having the ball in your hands, you're going to have some turnovers. But New Mexico's had they've had 4, games with multiple turnovers, 2 with 3+, including this last week, which they somehow managed to win. You've got to be the more composed team. New Mexico, not only do they struggle with turnovers a little bit, they rank 131st in the FBS in penalty yardage per game. at about 88 yards per game. It's offense and defense too. It's not like you can really pinpoint a one area. Has been a little bit better in recent weeks, to their credit, but they have definitely lacked discipline in some key instances, and it's the reason why, despite putting up some points, early on in the year, they ultimately ended up losing by double digits against a couple of Power 4 teams. Taylor in the Toyota chat wants to know, is Kyler Murray a good comp? Yeah, I would say it is. A kind of a stout, thicker guy, but runs really well. Is dangerous in the open field. Is certainly going to test your defensive containment. You've got to be able to take good angles on him, because if you don't, he is really dangerous. I guess Murray early on was pretty dangerous as a scrambler. Injuries have slowed him down a little bit. I think Dampier is faster than him. I don't have like 40 numbers or something like that. That's just eye test watching those guys in the open field. Murray maybe a little bit bigger arm, which kind of makes sense with his baseball background. But Dampier's electric, man. He scares the hell out of me. He's the biggest reason why I think this game is really like a 6.5 point spread and not, double digits, with the defensive struggles that New Mexico has had. As explosive as they are offensively, they struggle equally as much defensively. This is a matchup where I think you want to dictate the tone and tempo. You want to be able to lean on that ground game. I mean, do what you do. That's the identity of this offense, running more of a West Coast Shanahan style, zone blocking offense. But you also want to create some plays. You want to stretch the field a little bit. You want to create some explosive opportunities. They've done a good job of doing that in the ground game. I think 21 runs of 15 or more yards so far this season. They only had 7 all of last year. You want to create some more in the passing game. You've been able to do it in the second half to kind of put the game away in back-to-back wins. But on top of that, I want to see this team create a little bit more early on in the matchup. One of the things I think back to, with all those classic Shanahan offenses, obviously you're leaning on the ground game. And with those offensive lines, they were basically able to put any back in there and have success. Not too dissimilar to what CSU's been able to do this year between, Marshall and Morrow and Hollis and Dupree. All those guys have been able to produce for you in certain situations. But they were also taking a lot of play action shots. You're running those naked bootlegs, getting the quarterback out in space. And you're also going to go vertical on teams. You got to be able to stretch the sideline a little bit, take some seam shots up the middle. All of those things are what's going to make it so that when you do lean on that ground game, by the third quarter, they're not just putting 8 in the box and daring you to throw all day and making it really hard, which is kind of what happened late in that Oregon State game. I feel like CSU maybe got a little bit too stubborn there. I would have liked to have seen some of those naked bootlegs, for instance, in overtime, when instead of trying to run the ball up the middle on them. Eric says Murray has 240+ rushing touchdowns this year, so I stand corrected. He is as explosive as ever. I just feel like you don't want this to turn into a 50-47 style shootout, because as New Mexico has demonstrated over these last couple of weeks, those are the types of games they tend to win. They've scored a decent amount in basically every game this season. They've got a top 25 scoring offense in the country, also got a bottom 3 scoring defense. So it's kind of the type of games they play in. If you're creating big plays, if you're creating explosives, that's fine. But the more that your defense is on the field against a guy like Dampier, the more you're kind of asking for trouble there. He's just such a tough test, because they test your discipline every single play. It's not that different than Air Force. He can be great for 3 straight quarters, 6 straight drives or something like that. And then all of a sudden you have one, missed tackle in the open field, boom, touchdown. You have one little lapse, one little, bad angle, boom, touchdown. They can kill you so quickly. Their quick strike ability is very impressive. And a lot of that comes to, getting Dampier on the ground. The more time you give him, the more dangerous he becomes. And on top of that, you got to win the money downs. Henry Blackburn kind of talked about it. The success CSU has had on third down has been crucial these last 2 weeks in their wins. But that's also because you're having success early on in the series. You're getting stops on first and second down. You're consistently putting them in 3rd and 9, 3rd and 10. You've got to be able to wrap up early, put them in tough spots, but then take advantage. Not give up those back-breaking 3rd and long conversions, which at times the Rams have done in some games where they've fallen short. You got to be solid in the red zone. I talked about that so much in that San Jose State win. Yeah, you gave up some yards, and then against an explosive offense like New Mexico, they very easily are going to put 350 plus yards on the board, maybe even like 400. But can it be a bend don't break situation? Can you get stops when you have the opportunity, hold them to 3, create turnovers on downs like they did against San Jose State? All that fun stuff. We're great on third down against Air Force, less good on fourth down. That's just kind of what Air Force does, though. That I'm not going to focus too much on that. And then again, we said this at the beginning, but I want to double down on it. Don't leave the door open. You got to get a quick start. You got to get that ground game going, and obviously not beat yourself with turnovers, penalties, all of that. But leave no doubt, when you have an opportunity to punch the ball in the end zone, do so. Stop fumbling the freaking football. If you could just stop putting the ball on the ground, these games wouldn't have even been close these last 2 weeks. It's been very alarming. They've got to find a way to clean up some of those little things that continue to just kind of linger. I feel like as a whole, the Rams are, I think, tied for 26th in the country in the least amount of penalty yards per game. They've been fairly disciplined as a whole, but still, 2, 3, 4 times a game, they just have these moments that leave you kind of pulling your hair, whether it's an untimely fumble or just a badly timed penalty, snapping the ball, ahead of the 2-minute warning, and instead of letting the clock run. It's little things that add up, but you've got to find a way to get it done, because this is a team you should beat. But I would also say that they're very dangerous, and this is a game that many times over the years the Rams have found a way to lose. This is a really big test for the Rams in a uniquely difficult spot. Last week all the motivation was right there. You haven't beat that team since 2015. You haven't beat them in their building since 2002. Now it's completely different. You're going up against a team who you've won 12 straight times against. Can you keep the same type of intensity? Can you keep the same type of focus? We shall see. I'm going to get into some history as well as some of my memorable moments against UNM. But guys, you got to race into Raising Cane's, turbocharge your order, get you some delicious chicken fingers. I could really use some Raising Cane's right now. I'm hungry at the moment. But can't get enough of that Raising Cane's. The sweet sauce is so good. It's like a house sauce. I love it. The crinkle cut fries are perfect. And that Texas toast, I always got to get an extra piece of Texas toast. I know that's a lot of carbs. I don't care. When I'm going into Cane's, I'm living like a king. I'm treating myself. For cooked order, hand battered chicken fingers, race into Raising Cane's, turbocharge your chicken fingers. Get them even faster by ordering online at raisingcanes.com or check out their mobile app, Raising Cane's Chicken Fingers. One love. I also want to talk to you about Empire today. You guys have probably heard the jingle over the years, but I want to give you some of the facts. Guys, Empire is the best around with shop at home convenience. It's the best way to get new flooring. Nobody can touch them on their quality, on their speed, on their service. So what they do is they advertise a bunch of low quality junk that Empire, they won't even keep in their selection. What they omit is just as important as what they offer. They're not trying to overwhelm you with 8 million choices. They're just trying to show you the best of the best, the type of flooring they would put in their own home. With their virtual floor designer, it's a great way to see how any property is going to look with some new flooring. You want to see how it's going to look with, your wall, with your furniture. Boom, snap a picture. Easy peasy. Schedule a free in-home estimate today. All listeners can get a $350 discount when they use a promo code DNVR. Restrictions do apply. See empiretoday.com/DNVR for details. All right. This is the 70th all-time meeting between CSU and New Mexico, two schools that are very much deep-rooted. In the Mountain West, obviously, got the old school Mountain West logo on today in honor of this matchup. I went back in the WAC, the RMAC even before that. The Rams lead the series 44-25. They have won 12 straight, have had a lot of success of late. That said, I always have had kind of a soft spot for this matchup. One, there's just a lot of history. It's one that's very familiar to me. I've seen it, just about every year in my life. There have been a couple of instances where they didn't play. 2020 for COVID, they actually didn't play last season. But the largest margin of victory for the Rams, 47-40, that was in 1990. The smallest margin of victory was a 1-point win back in 1993, 21-20. The reason I bring all this up though is that it kind of tends to be a really tight game, like a one-scored 1, 2, 3-point type game, or it tends to be a blowout, and that kind of works both ways. The Rams lead 44-25 all time. Their largest margin of victory, 40 points. Their largest margin of defeat, 42 points back in 1964, got stomped. Even in this 12-game win streak, it's been kind of funny. Like 7 of the games have been wins of 10 or more points, a lot of blowouts. The other 5 have all been, by one-score games. So if I had to guess, I would lean towards a one-score game this weekend over, a 10-point game, just because of the type of offense that New Mexico has. But I mean, they're kind of due too, which is what makes me really nervous in this game. When I was a kid, New Mexico was a tricky opponent for the Rams. They won 5 of 7 between 2003 and 2009. 4 of those were by 3 or fewer points, I believe. It felt like they lost a handful of really frustrating ones, including their most recent loss back in 2009. That was a 2-point loss. New Mexico's only win of the season under Locksley. Kind of funny how he's been able to revitalize his career out in Maryland after going to the Nick Saban's school for reformed coaches down in Tuscaloosa. The Rams have beaten New Mexico in 14 of the 16 seasons that they've qualified for a bowl, going back to 1990. Some of that probably coincidence, but historically, there's precedent there, much like when you have a 1,000-yard rusher. In the years that CSU beats UNM, a lot of the times, they end up reaching the postseason, or at least I guess I should say when they reach the postseason, more times than not, it ends up being in a year in which they beat UNM. There were plenty of years where they beat the Lobos, and they were only like a 3 or 4 win team. But just kind of looking at the history, a lot of the things are starting to click for the Rams. And when they make bowl games, they tend to have some success in local rivalry games. They finally beat Air Force. When they make bowl games, they tend to have a great offensive line and run the football with consistency. Check and check. Now you have an opportunity to get within one game of bowl eligibility by beating a team who you have frankly dominated over the years. A couple of my favorite moments as far as CSU New Mexico goes, and these are really personal. This is not less to do with like this matchup and more just some fun moments we can look back on. My favorite was the 2016 game. That was obviously the final matchup in Hughes, a really special night. It was really cold that night, November 19th, 2016. The Rams win 49-31, got big rushing performances from Izzy Matthews, Marvin Kinsey, and Dalen Dawkins in that game. It was just a really special night for everybody to celebrate, a stadium that had been such a big part of all of our lives and our community for, over a half century. I'll definitely always look back on that one fondly. Yeah, the 2014 win was on Senior Day. That was a 58-20 win for the second straight year. The Rams had a running back rush for 6 touchdowns in the game. Capri did it in Albuquerque in 2013, which I guess we could just talk about these games simultaneously. Those are 2 of my favorite moments. 2013, I remember watching that game in the dorms with all my buddies freshman year, and you had the Crockett Gilmore play. Look it up on YouTube if you've never seen it. Crockett Gilmore broke like 7 tackles, just stiff arming dudes left and right. Capri went crazy, set the school record for rushing touchdowns in a game with 6. Then 1 year later, D Hart ties that record in 2014, also rushes for 6 touchdowns against the Lobos. That was my first ever game on the sidelines of a college football team, which was a big deal to me. I worked for the team at the time. I didn't have any like fancy game day responsibility or anything like that, but to get to be on the sidelines for that win in that historic season, 10-win year with all those guys, Grayson and Higgins and, some of those great O linemen and even Trent Matthews and KPL, like defensively, it was just it was a day that meant a lot to me. And, even 10 years later now, which is just insane. I'll always look back on that as kind of a special day, despite the fact that, it's a 58-20 win, it wasn't a close game at all. And then I'll throw out the 2017 win as well. October 20th, 2017 down in Albuquerque. It extended CSU's winning streak in the conference to 4 straight games. That was basically the last fun moment that season before the wheels fell off. They lost to Air Force the next week, and then obviously you had the Wyoming and Boise State losses, which were just brutal. But I think that was my second trip ever out on the road covering the Rams, or maybe it was my third because we went to Utah State and Bama that year as well. But it was a lot of fun. I've always kind of had a soft spot for Albuquerque. The food's incredible. I have a lot of friends that are fans of the Lobos, so it's always been a program I've kind of always rooted for. And honestly, I'm rooting for Bronco Mendenhall to have success down there. I think he was a stellar hire for the program. I hope he transforms it. I'd love to see the Lobos back in the postseason. I just hope that transformation process happens a little bit more down the line. We don't want to see that start by snapping the losing streak that they currently have against CSU. I will say publicly they're saying all the right things. Mendenhall pretty dismissive when asked about the 12-game winning streak. Obviously, publicly, I think it makes the most sense to do that. I mean, it wasn't like he coached those teams. He hadn't experienced it. That said, I think there's no way behind the scenes in the locker room that's not being drilled to those players that, you've lost 12 straight to this team, and it's not like they've exactly been world beaters. Snapping that streak, I do think would be a big moment for them. So this is a big test for the Rams. Can you beat an athletic and explosive and hungry team coming into your building? This is a big moment. It's probably going to be close to, if not a sellout crowd for homecoming. Should be a gorgeous day. I feel like a lot of the times, at least this century, these are moments when CSU has fallen short. Back-to-back weeks, you have won the type of matchup you historically have not won very frequently, at least in the last 15, 20 years. Can you do that again? By now, not beating yourselves against New Mexico? Can you find a way to get just enough stops, produce just enough offensively to take them down? They're going to test you. I really do think this will be a good game. It'll probably be a stressful game, but just find a way to win. Just win. Much like against Air Force last week, I don't really care how you get it done. Just find a way to get it done. Get one step closer to getting back to the postseason and put yourself 2 games above 500 for the first time since 2017. Before we get out of here, take a breath, and then we are going to give a little update on what's happening in Agland, talk CSU soccer, talk CSU volleyball. All right. CSU women's soccer now 11-3-3 on the year, having a solid season. Under Keeley Hagan, very much a program on the rise. They beat New Mexico 3-1 yesterday. They're undefeated in league play at 7-0-2. They had ties against 2 of the other top teams in the league, Boise State and Utah State. But other than that, remaining perfect throughout Mountain West play. They've only allowed more than 1 goal twice all season, which is very, very impressive. Defensively, they've been great. So have both the goaltenders that have played. Currently tied with Boise State, also with 23 total points at the top of the conference. The Rams have San Diego State on Sunday and then Wyoming on Halloween to close out. They have a chance, I feel like, if they can win both of these games, not lose or draw, if they can win both games. Boise has to wrap with UNLV, but then they go to Utah State, who's really good this year. That's a tough matchup. Should have a chance, should have a chance to solidify that 1 seed. They already have qualified for the Mountain West tournament, but you want to be that 1 seed going in. CSU volleyball also won last night. They took New Mexico down 3-1. They've won a couple of matches in a row now after dropping a couple of tough ones. They're in a really winnable stretch of their schedule. I highlighted that about a week ago. This was a stretch where they had an opportunity to potentially create some distance between them and the rest of the league. They really need to take advantage here and beat UNLV and Air Force, both of which have struggled, both of which you've already beaten. And then after that, you've got really important trips. You've got Boise, who beat you in a tough one at Fort Collins. And then, Wyoming, who's not great this year, but you can never discredit the potential of a rival punching up, especially in a year where, frankly, CSU has been erratic in terms of their results. They at times really flash their experience and really look dominant in ways that are very familiar. CSU for the most part for the last 30 years has run this league And at other times they've looked completely lost. And, they've lost a lot of tight matches, which is, something that I just don't remember ever really happening under Hilbert. Like, they were so clutch in those fifth sets. And it feels like the last couple of years that's been kind of a struggle for this program. That said, even after all the struggles that you had early on in the season, posting your worst non-conference record since the 80s, if you win the league, if you get to the NCAA tournament, all would be forgiven. And the Rams are in a spot where they can control their own destiny here over the final month of the regular season. But the big thing is not having slip-ups against lower competition, which they've had a couple this year. So we'll see kind of how they are able to respond. If you've got any more questions or comments, send them my way. I'll get to as many as I can before we get out of here. I feel like we've basically thoroughly set the scene for this CSU New Mexico matchup over the last couple of days. If you missed it, I had Sean Ryder on the show as well. Or Ryder? I'm drawing a blank on the pronunciation at the moment. He was great from the Albuquerque Journal. I did a really great job of giving some insight into the state of the New Mexico program. Talked about how the community's starting to buy in, but they're still, a little shy to go full in, which makes sense. I think everybody recognizes that despite the fact that they've been able to pull off a 3-game winning streak, which is impressive, the teams they've beaten haven't been great. Combined 4 wins. That's not to say that CSU has beat a bunch of world beaters this year either, but they do have, a couple of quality wins. San Jose State obviously being the best so far, and while Air Force may be down, that's been a house of horrors for the program. So I'm not going to ever apologize for finding a way to grind out a rivalry win in a place where a lot of teams have fallen over the years. Obviously just ask, Notre Dame, who lost there in the 80s. The Buffs, obviously, the last time they went down there, got dog walked. I mean, it's just not an easy place to play. I'll never forget that 2014 loss. Went in there as this superior team and blew a chance to play for the Mountain West title game. Lost a shootout in 2016. This time they found a way to get it done. Now they need to find a way to get it done once again against New Mexico, a program who you have thoroughly owned over the last 15 years. Can you continue to do so? We'll see. I mean, beating a conference opponent that many times in a row, it's just not something that happens very frequently. And it's why, despite being the better team, I think, pretty clearly going into this game, I'm definitely nervous. At some point they're just due. And on top of that, this is the most explosive this offense has been in quite a long time. So they're definitely going to test us. Taylor wants to know, going to the hoop scrimmage later. We'll see. You don't really gain a lot from those. Those are more for the fans than anything else. Probably just because I'm a hoop sicko, but I really don't think there's much of value that comes out of those. Rick wants to know, with back-to-back seasons having 7 home games, what needs to happen to make Canvas a stronger home field advantage? Win. If you win, more fans show up. If you win, more fans stay. When you're winning, it's going to be a good atmosphere. When you're losing, it's tough to maintain. And that's true at even the biggest of programs. When you look at a Big Ten team, when they're down come fourth quarter, going to be a lot of empty seats. And you could say the same thing about the SEC. I mean, it's an issue everywhere. If you're not winning, people aren't going to stick around. And it's really as simple as that. Are there little things that you could do to make the atmosphere better? Yes. And I think CSU has done a good job of kind of addressing those of late, having a MC in the stadium, trying to do some new pregame stuff. I think all of that is big. But ultimately what it really comes down to is the energy within the stadium over those 4 quarters, much more so than pregame or anything that happens in the break. But people aren't going to be lively. They're not going to be, causing a ruckus out there if the Rams are struggling. And the Rams have been struggling for a long time. I feel like, you're right on the verge there. And I think this weekend is really important in that regard, where if you win this game and then, all of a sudden you've got a really intriguing game coming up against Nevada after that. But if you could win these next 2 games, the atmosphere that you would have for the border war would be so electric, especially at that point. You're hoping to potentially play your way into the conference championship game if you can win these next couple. But you gotta avoid some slip ups against some teams that you're better than. But play hard and are tough and are going to challenge you, and frankly probably would find ways to beat lesser Rams teams of the past, teams that were less composed. And we'll see how this team handles this big test. But that's all I've got for you guys this morning. Big shout out to everybody that's been rocking with us. Much love to Alyssa on the sticks, making all of this happen. Best producer in the game. I'll be going live tomorrow night, tomorrow evening, I guess, post game. We'll see roughly what time that is. It'll be kind of dependent on how long the post game process takes, getting my interviews and all that. Frankly, hopefully it takes a little bit longer, because that's usually indicative of a Rams win. When they lose, the interviews usually happen a little bit sooner. But yeah, that's all I've got. Big time homecoming matchup for this program. You found a way to win some tough ones over the last couple of weeks. Can you keep it up now? And can you capitalize on a schedule that is very much in your favor? Big opportunity for the green and gold. I'm always proud to be. Much love, y'all. Peace.
We all silly like the mayor.